Well, Interpret America was a partnership with Barry Slaughter Olson that we ran between 2010 and 2020. And really, our mission was always to try and raise the profile of interpreting across the field. And when we began the process, we weren't even talking to each other really as a profession. And it ended not for any other reason that Barry moved on in the profession. He took a position with Kudo, which is the remote simultaneous interpreting platform. So you can't really have a high profile corporate position and have a separate brand out there. So we had to end that brand. And I did spend time thinking about, should I carry it on and have another partner or carry it on solo? But in the end, I felt like it really was a partnership unique to us. And so we ended it with a session last January, and everybody can see it still on the website. The website's still up, but I have gone on to found my new platform, which is called Words Across Borders. So what a lot of people maybe not know about me is that I really have had a long parallel experience and interest in international development and interpreting and language access in international settings, and not in the high level, government to government or, really international institution to international institution, but really everywhere, all that other nonprofit work that happens around climate and, the environment and medical missions and things like that. And so that's where I really would like to be, kind of trying to slowly pivot my ship to more in that direction so I can do more projects along those lines. And for example, one of the projects I've been working with for about 5 years now is a medical mission work down in Chiapas in Mexico with the Rotary International, through Rotary International grants. And we've done a lot to formally embed interpreting and translation into those medical missions. And they've been really successful. They're educational missions where you're teaching, providers to providers and providing some services. And two of them were just recognized by the World Health Organization, which is really quite something in the role that embedding language access into them in a formal way where you pick where you're going to have professional expertise versus volunteer expertise was part of that recognition. So that's super exciting for me. And that's the kind of thing that I'm really interested in, sort of getting better visibility and access in those spaces. Well, I had to go back and remember when it really was, but it was actually as a senior in high school, and I was in the advanced Spanish classes. That's how I learned Spanish. I had to wait till later to live somewhere. And so of course, there's that classic thing where Taco Time, not Taco Bell, but Taco Time, which is another taco chain, approached the high school and said, we need someone to help us out with a business meeting. And so my very first meeting was going into the back rooms, like a corporate conference room at Taco Time between the executives, from the US and executives from Mexico, because they wanted to expand the chain. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, and I had zero of the correct terminology. It was one of the most kind of awkward experiences, but that was my first paid interpreting gig, actually. And then after that, I had quite a lot of experience in Chile working with environmental groups, between American and Chilean environmental groups. And none of that was paid, but I would say that was probably, and I didn't even know I was interpreting, right? But I did a lot of interpreting. So that's probably really where I got my actual launch. But the first paid gig was in high school, not gig, excuse me. The first paid assignment was in high school. Well, I ended up having quite a lot of experience, which I think is a little unexpected for me. But my very first experience came in 2003 when I volunteered for an international temperate rainforest conference, actually up in Canada. And I ended up being the main interpreter for a Mapuche indigenous poet and activist from Chile. And they were holding meetings with the activists from Alaska and from the First Nations in Canada. And so that was really my first experience interpreting for Indigenous in any kind of Indigenous setting. And then fast forward to about 2015, I had a 5-year project with the Natividad Medical Foundation, where we created the Indigenous Interpreter Training Program. And we ended up with a 63-hour program, and a textbook and the manual, and the textbook and the manual are available free for download for everybody. So it's a resource that has gone out to everybody. And then since then, we've done a lot of relay interpreting on those medical missions between Tzotzil and Spanish and English. And I'm currently working on several projects to try and train up Indigenous trainers of trainers for the Indigenous Interpreter Project. So I just seem to, it's a little awkward and uncomfortable for me because I feel so, I'm obviously non-Indigenous and I'm not even, native Spanish speaker. But I feel like I somehow have been chosen to be a bridge, like somehow the ability to write curriculum and textbooks and, create short course training is that I feel like that's the expertise I have to bring to the table. So. So we were laughing about this. You can't ask Gemini what was the single most interesting experience on the job, right? There's too many. I would say that probably I'm going to give you two. One was on one of the medical missions. We worked with the Indigenous midwives, and they were receiving training from American OB and OBGYNs around how to prevent hemorrhaging, by doing like moving the woman around and having a lot of just low resource techniques that could help women from bleeding to death. And so we set up a simultaneous relay because there was this unbelievably gifted, linguistically gifted professional midwife who was Tzotzil and spoke Spanish and Tzotzil quite fluently and did a lot of teaching in Tzotzil. And so we had a relay between English into Spanish, and then she would take off the Spanish, and we had a group of about 30 traditional midwives, all in their traditional dress, listening to the portable equipment, right, to a Tzotzil relay. That was honestly one of the most mind-blowing experiences I had. It really was quite something to see an authentic simultaneous going into an Indigenous language, because that's such a hard thing to achieve. So that's one experience. And another would be that when I was first getting into this field more formally, I did a lot of interpreting in early intervention settings. And I would take my babies, because it's so rural here and there's nobody around. So they'd say, bring your babies. And so I'd bring I had like babies, I had no childcare. And so I'd bring my babies to to these centers where they were doing the physical therapy and the speech therapy and all the different kinds of therapies. And I learned so much about child development. And I also learned so much about the limits of interpreting in those settings and how much work we have to do to it's like, you want me to give you an opinion about whether somebody pronounced something well or not in Spanish as a 3-year-old, that kind of thing. But I loved that. I loved that interpreting. It's some of my favorite memories of getting to do that, working in those settings. I think my biggest theme right now is visibility. It's been a theme. It was one of the biggest themes for Interpret America right from the beginning, and it continues to be, especially as we move into these times when there's more legislation directly impacting the classification issues about whether we should be classified as employees or whether we should be allowed to work as freelancers. And with the work I've done on advocacy areas, it is just so clear. We're just so invisible still. Like, we work in every industry and nobody sees us. And I see it as well with all the remote interpreting, and especially the remote simultaneous interpreting that we've all had to do. Just the lowering of working conditions and the stress put on people just by the simple fact that we cannot convince people to wear a headset. They hire us to interpret for them, but they won't give us even the most basic working conditions. And that's true in conference areas, just as true in the conference side as it is on the non-conference side. And we're just not visible enough, right? People don't see what we do as a truly professional act where they need to take us as experts and pay attention to what we're asking for. And so I just, visibility would be my biggest thing. Anything we can do to become more articulate amongst ourselves, and anything we can do to have the industries that we work in really see us as more bona fide professionals. That would be my biggest change I'd like to see. Well, from the future panel, I can't speak for my fellow panelists, but I do think that we will have to be addressing what happens next now that we're coming out of the pandemic. I think there were a lot of disruptive changes bubbling around in the field. And I don't mean that's not necessarily negative, but there's just, because it's such a fast changing time, there's just a lot of changes coming in how interpreting services are being delivered and how we're engaging with all those actors. And I think COVID just supercharged that. It's like we strapped on, rocket boosters and what got moved 10 or 15 years into the future in a year. And so I think the future panel is going to have to address how we respond to that, and can we respond to that in some kind of intentional way. In terms of the freelance session, I think that, again, with the advocacy work I've been doing, and it's not a very long session. So for me, the biggest thing is going to be really looking at how we can position ourselves to be seen as professionals as this legislation is coming down the pike. It's not enough just to be Catherine Allen interpreter. Like, we can be a sole proprietor, but we have to have some kind of professional presence. We have to really, even if it's just like a one-page website and on LinkedIn and all the rest of it, but really owning the fact that as freelancers, we're business people and we need to have people see us that way. And so we can protect our right to work, whether we want to work as an employee or work as a freelancer. We really have to have kind of a industry-wide or a profession-wide strategy for that, I think. So, or tools at any rate for freelancers. So that would be a little bit of a teaser.